Coming in at number 5, we've got the Mary Celeste. Don't be tricked by the lovely name, this ship is no fair maiden. Maybe it was named for one, but that's got nothing to do with their ghostly tale. This tale is a tragic one indeed, and one that seems ridiculously risky by today's standards. A captain decided he wanted to make the trip from New York to Italy aboard his ship, the Mary Celeste. Had he decided to bring a super experienced crew and a bunch of cargo, that would be one thing, but this nautical journey was no such business trip. Instead, he decided to bring his wife, 2-year-old daughter, and a crew of 7. That's a small group of people for such an extensive journey, especially when bringing one's family along. But everyone boarded the ship regardless and headed out to sea. Their journey should have been about a month, but they never arrived in Italy. Instead, another ship known as the Dei Gracia came across the Mary Celeste, floating aimlessly in the sea. Assuming the worst, the crew of this new ship went to see if anyone was still aboard. But they were never able to help anyone as the ship turned out to be empty. But it wasn't totally gutted though. There were still plenty of supplies in the larder and the ship itself was still in pretty good shape. Sure, there was a bunch of water on the deck, but it wasn't like it was gonna sink anytime soon. Stranger still, the lifeboat was gone with no indication as to why or where it was heading. So there the Mary Celeste was, without a captain, crew, or family, drifting in the Atlantic. It became one of the most famous ghost ships of its era too, as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle drew inspiration from it, and used this inspiration to write his short story, J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement. This tale was a launching board for many theories, from pirates to mutiny to cold-blooded murder. The thing is, nobody knows for sure what actually happened. The captain, his crew, and his family were never heard from again. Now, there are some more realistic theories that have come forth about the inexperienced captain not knowing the full extent of damage to his ship and ordering everyone maybe prematurely onto a lifeboat at the first sight of land. Even so, that likely ended in tragedy as well, as the lifeboat never made it to shore, or so we think. And with all those supplies still on board and the ship not going down anytime soon, it feels a bit like an ironic tragedy now, doesn't it? Coming in at number 4, we've got the Kobenhavn. 5 masts, and none of them prevented the ship from going ghost. You'd think it would be easier to spot that way, but hey, unlike our last ghostly tale, this ship was jam-packed with capable sailors. Well, partly anyway. The Kobenhavn was known as a training ship, which would often take a fair number of cadets. They would learn how to best run the ship so that their subsequent journeys might go a little smoother. One would assume that a training ship wouldn't be subject to overly harsh conditions, just like how any training is supposed to lower the risk of failure during a real-life scenario. Unfortunately, this was not the case. 60 sailors marched aboard this well-fitted ship, and once they departed, they were never seen again. The ship had all anyone would need to succeed, including plenty of lifeboats, an auxiliary engine, and a wireless communication system. So, what went wrong? Nobody really knows. It left the Rio de la Plata on December 14th, heading to Australia. On the 21st, the crew was in touch with another ship and all seemed to be well. After that though, they went totally silent. Some think they ran into an iceberg, others claim that it could have been something more sinister. Either way, darkness and fog definitely played into the equation. For years, the Kobenhavn was missing in action with nothing to show for it. However, some sailors did claim to see a phantom ship with 5 masts sailing the seas. Now, the ghost crew hasn't attempted to communicate with anybody yet, nor has anybody been able to get close enough to confirm what they've seen. But you'd better believe those cadets are seasoned sailors by now. Back in 2012, a wreck was discovered that many believe to be the Kobenhavn. However, this still goes unconfirmed. Coming in at number 3, we've got the tale of the Jenny. Now, the tales I've told up until this point have been mysterious indeed. The fates of the folks on board are up in the air and may never be fully explained. The story of the Jenny is just as mysterious, especially because it's been contested by a few folks, but the fate of the crew, if you believe the story, is more cut and dry, or should I say, frozen and wet. In this unsubstantiated story of oceanic horror, the crew of a ship named Hope came across what appeared to be a ship in pretty good shape. From a distance, there appeared to be crew members working on the deck. This struck the crew of the Hope as a little strange, as the Jenny had been missing for many years. When they got closer, it all started making sense though. The men they had seen atop the ship were indeed still there, but not alive. Each one was frozen solid, met with a frigid end. Yikes. Things got worse when the captain of the Hope decided to check out the inside of the ship, where he found more frozen corpses. The Jenny's captain was discovered frozen to a chair with a journal nearby. The final entry in his log read, "No food for 71 days. I am the only one left alive." That one sentence carries all sorts of latent horror, with images of more than 2 months without food in a horrible frozen environment. One has to wonder if any crewmates became food for the survivors, and what life must have been like as Hope faded by the day. Coming in number 2, we've got the Baron Falkenberg. Here's a general rule for life: don't kill your brother and his bride. If you can't abide by that, maybe you deserve to be carted out to a ghost ship and doomed to roam the waters until time immemorial. The good Baron was unable to follow this seemingly simple rule and ended up in a less than savory position. The story goes like this. One day, after being missing for quite a while, Baron Falkenberg's brother returned home. Folks were quite pleased with his return, and the brother proposed marriage to a lovely young maiden the Baron himself was interested in. At their wedding feast, the Baron lost his temper and cracked his sibling over the head with a bottle, killing him. The bride-to-be was terrified and ran off, but the Baron pursued her to confess his love. This didn't go over very well, and the woman told the Baron that she'd rather be dead than be with him. A very literal man, the Baron interpreted this dramatic retort as a request, and he stabbed her. Realizing the grave mistake he'd made, the Baron fled to the beach, where he found a man with a dinghy waiting. This man told the Baron that the captain was waiting for him and rowed out to a much larger ship off the shore. From there, the Baron boarded the ship, and for the past half a millennium, he's remained on board. This ship always seems to be heading north, flickering with blue flame and filled with skeletal sailors. And finally, at number 1, we've got the Palatine. Forget the Block Island sound, we're talking about the Block Island light. If you ever find yourself around Rhode Island between Christmas and New Year's, take a look across the water at night. It's said you might see an old ship blazing against the darkness. There are many stories about where this ship came from, and none have been officially confirmed. Some say that the crew had come down with a terrible illness and the captain would not let them go to shore. Others say that folks from Rhode Island lured the ship to the shoals in order to take what they could from it, killing the remaining passengers. And then there's the alternate version where the locals actually rescued the folks on board and nursed them back to health. So why is the ship on fire in the ghostly apparitions then? Well, apparently a woman was left on the island by the ship and eventually came to be known as a witch. She got her revenge on the vessel by imagining it on fire and cursing it for leaving her alone. This idea became more popular, and now the story involves a flaming ship.
Number 5, the Octavius. The Octavius became more than just a legend in 1775 when a whaling ship named the Herald found it aimlessly drifting off the coast of Greenland. The scary part? With all of its crew frozen dead by the Arctic cold's mist and winds. To add to the spookiness, the ship's captain was even found sitting at his desk with a logbook in front of him, finishing a log entry from 1762. The Octavius was a legendary 18th century ghost ship. According to the story, the 3-masted schooner was found west of Greenland, boarded as a derelict. The 5-man boarding party found the entire crew of 28 below deck, completely frozen solid and almost perfectly preserved. The captain's body was supposedly slouched over the table in his cabin, pen in hand, with the captain's log in front of him. In his cabin, there were also the bodies of a woman and a boy covered with a blanket, and a sailor with a tinderbox in his hand trying to stay warm. The boarding party took only the captain's log before leaving the vessel, trying not to touch the remains or evidence of what possibly could have been the reason for the lost ship at sea. The last entry from the logbook was November 11th, 1762, which meant that the ship had been lost in the Arctic for 13 years. Can you imagine? 13 years of just traveling the Arctic, sailing slowly while frozen bodies lay still on board as a ghost ship? Yo, that's just like terrifying, okay? Like seeing a ghost ship sail up beside you from the fog, crystallized in frozen ice with the horrors that lay below the deck. Very sad, but also very scary, you know? Number 4, the SS Valencia. Side note, if you like what we do here, make sure you always Hulk smash that like button or throw a comment down below. It really helps the channel out. Let us know what other ghost ships you know of, and I'll check them out for a part 2 or maybe even a part 3. Speaking of more ghost ships, the SS Valencia is one of the creepier ship stories. Pulling up and finding a completely abandoned ship is scary enough. Those are people's lives lost. It's scary stuff. The SS Valencia was an American iron-hulled passenger steamer built for service in 1882 by William Cramp and Sons. It did many things. In 1897, the Valencia was attacked by a Spanish cruiser, Reina Mercedes, just off the Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. They tried to sink her, but nope. She was built strong, and she survived. A year later, she became a passenger liner for the US West Coast, where she served in the Spanish-American War as a troop ship during the conflict. Eventually, after her service, the Valencia was wrecked off of Cape Beale, the west coast of Vancouver Island, British Columbia, on January 22, 1906, as her sinking unfortunately took 100 passengers with her. Some classify the wreck of the Valencia as the worst maritime disaster in, quote, the graveyard of the Pacific, which is a famously known treacherous area off the southwest coast of Vancouver Island. That's a horrible nickname for a shallow area also, right? Like, the graveyard? That's horrible. 6 months after the sinking, a local fisherman and his wife reported seeing a lifeboat with 8 skeletons in a nearby sea cave at the shoreline of Pachena Bay. The cave was reported to be around 200 feet deep. There was no definite explanation for the lifeboat's presence in the cave, but due to the dangerous seas outside the cave's mouth, the lifeboat along with its human remains couldn't be recovered. Local fishermen similarly report lifeboats being rowed by skeletons of the Valencia's victims just offshore as well. Most famous sighting was a rescue ship named the Topeka. Some observers on board, who were survivors of the just sunken Valencia, claimed, while sailing home with the survivors, a ship approached from the fog, and the ship passing was the just sank Valencia. The crew on board apparently now all skeletons. Yo, I'm getting the Curse of the Black Pearl vibes right now, are you? Like, that's scary, scary. Number 2, Lady Lovibond. A ghostly story of lust, love, jealousy, and rage. The dark history of this haunted love boat. In 1748, the day before Valentine's Day, it was set to sail as a celebration of the ship's captain's wedding. On February 13th, 1748, the ship contained by the newly married Simon Peel was carrying his new wife Annetta and their wedding guests from London to Oporto, Portugal. Unknown to the captain, his first mate Rivers was also in love with Annetta, and in a fit of insane jealousy, seized the helm after murdering the helmsman and deliberately steered the ship towards the Goodwin Sands, where it ran aground, cracking the ship in half and unfortunately drowning everybody on board. And there, the story might have ended, had it not been witnessed for all the claims to have seen the ghostly ship appear every 50 years. Some of them even passing close enough to hear the sounds of celebration. Apparently on the 13th of February, the Edenbridge spots Lady Lovibond's ship exactly 50 years later. It was reported seen by ship captain James Westlake, and according to his testimony, he almost collided with the ship before he could finally turn the steering wheel to avoid the collision. Dude, close call, just shows up out of nowhere? Like, what? He also recorded in his logbook the ship was headed straight for the Goodwin Sands. Other sightings have been reported at 50-year intervals, except for 1984, when the ship failed to materialize. 1798, 1848, 1898, and 1948 witnessed the ship's sightseeings. Even some boats sent out rescuers, assuming that it was in distress or lost at sea, but later it could never be found. Yo. A tale as old as time, huh? Jealousy, that'll do it. Yep, always does. And number 1, the Flying Dutchman. In all maritime folklore, this ghost ship has left quite an impact like no other. It's the ghost ship, the oldest one in the book. Well, maybe not the oldest, but definitely the most prolific and well known. The Pirates of the Caribbean, the Dead Man's Chest is literally the story of this. The legend, Vanderdecken, the captain, is on his way towards the East Indies with a confidence and determination. He tried to steer his ship through the horrid weather conditions of the Cape of the Good Hope, but failed miserably. Even after, of course, vowing to drift until his own demise, you see, he apparently signed a little deal with you-know-who. He swore that he would succeed through the perils of waves even if he had to sail until his judgment day. The devil apparently heard his oath and took him up on it, and now the Dutchman is condemned to stay at sea forever. Legend says that since then, they have been cursed to sail the oceans for eternity. To this day, hundreds of fishermen and sailors from the deep sea have claimed to have even witnessed the Flying Dutchman, continuing its never-ending voyage across never-ending waters. The most famous sightings, I would say, is that of Prince George V of Wales. He was on a 3-year voyage in 1880 with his older brother Prince Albert of Wales and their tutor. The prince's log records say the following for the pre-dawn hours of July 11, 1881 near Australia. Quote, 4 a.m. The Flying Dutchman crossed our bows. A strange red light as a phantom ship glow, which lights the masts, spars, and sails of a brig 200 yards distant as she came up on the port bow, but on arriving there was no vestige or nor any sign whatever of a material ship. Seen right away to the horizon, 13 persons altogether saw her. That's a prince writing, so yeah, that's pretty good source material, I'd say. This is horrific. Imagine a ghost ship faded by red light pulling up towards your ship in the middle of the night, then just cruises on by. Yeah, that'd be the end of me, for sure.
Coming at number 5, we've got the MS Antonia Graza. What better way to kick off a list about ghost ships than with the vessel from the movie, Ghost Ship. Folks really love this one and come out in droves to sing its praises whenever possible. It's easy to understand why, too. With an absolutely brutal opening sequence and plenty of phantom fun aboard a wicked Italian ocean liner, there's a little something for everyone. The mystery behind the ship's fate is a fascinating one too, revealed over the course of the flick to great effect. See, all we really know about this ghost ship at the beginning is that there's some sort of tampering that caused the entirety of the crew and passengers to be sliced in half by a very tense wire. The only survivor was a young girl, as she was too short to be whipped in twain. Well, she survived the initial disaster, but being alone on a ship in the middle of the sea doesn't bode well for anyone. Decades later, a salvaged tugboat comes across the ghost ship and decides to give it a whirl. Upon boarding, they discover an enormous bounty of gold bars and an even more impressive collection of wayward spirits. They meet all sorts of ghosts who give them wishy-washy answers on what happened to them, all while some tugboat crew members are lured to untimely deaths by tricky spirits. Uh-oh. This ghost ship keeps getting, well, more ghastly. It's a mystery right up until the very end, and even then there's more to discover. It's more than just ghosts aboard this ship, there are demons and soul collectors aboard as well. And if you think that's the end of it, well, I've got some news for you. It's not. If you want ghosts, mysteries, and ships, this is the movie for you, and even if just one of those boxes is something you want ticked, I promise it'll work quite well. So good luck, and watch out for the ferryman. Seriously, that dude's bad news. Coming in number 4, we've got the HMS Erebus and Terror. Now, this one's fun because it kind of crosses the line between history and fiction. If you're big into horror TV or horror novels, you've probably heard of this tale already, as it was adapted first into a book and then a popular series. Both known as the Terror, they take a look at the events surrounding a pair of particularly interesting ghost ships, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror. These did indeed set sail way back in 1845 on a mission led by Captain Sir John Franklin. They were meant to explore the last unnavigated bits of the Northwest Passage to see if there was anything to be learned from the magnetic data up there. Unfortunately, both ships became trapped in ice in what one day would be Nunavut. Not ideal, right? Well, some theorize that the deadly cold and lack of supplies were only the beginning of these sailors' problems. There are many possibilities and variables when you put over 100 men on a couple of ships stuck in a frozen wasteland, and for many years, nobody truly knew what their fates were. After being icebound for more than a year, the ships were abandoned. It's said that Franklin and many others had already died by that point. With that knowledge, the rest of the crew, including Francis Crozier and James Fitzjames, went out in search of land. They were never heard from again. More than a century and a half later, both wrecks were discovered and they're both regularly explored and studied. But what happened when the ships were stuck? Why did the crews wait so long before striking out for land? Were there really no other options? In The Terror, a terrifying monster is introduced to keep the plot tense and exciting. Could such a creature really have appeared? Elements like madness and cannibalism are also introduced in the fictional retelling of this wreck, which seems like they could have played a part in the real-life tragedy. Still, the tales from the ships are just as chilling now as they've ever been, and the fates of all those who abandoned the ships at the end are still a mystery. Did they freeze and fall beneath the surface? Were they discovered by Arctic predators? Maybe they were taken in by nearby tribes, never to return to their previous lives. Someday we may find out the truth, but for now, it's all conjecture. Coming in number 3, we've got the Wind Waker's ghost ship. Now we're back to some total fiction. In the most seafaring of the Legend of Zelda games, of course there's going to be a mysterious ghost ship to discover. Many folks looking back on their gaming experience recall this encounter with trepidation. It was freaky to find a ghastly vessel in what seemed to be a relatively cheerful game, especially when you couldn't actually interact with the ship without a specific chart. It would coast around the ocean, moving from place to place based on the position of the moon. Sailing at night became more of a thrill once you knew a ghost ship could cross your path. Worse yet, if you did have the appropriate chart and made it on board, you'd be greeted with plenty of skulls and a few enemies, which tells the tale of a very unfortunate crew if you ask me. Thankfully, there is treasure to be found on this ship, and once you open it, the entire ship will disappear, with a really creepy laugh to boot. Unbeknownst to the treasure seeker, they'll end up unconscious on their boat afterwards. How'd they get there? Who did those skulls belong to? Where did the boat go? All good questions, but not all of them have good answers. Ask around and you'll just hear tales of terror. Apparently the person who put the ghost ship chart together died shortly afterwards, so you can't even ask for more details. Oh well, that's life. Or afterlife. Coming in number 2, we've got the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. How does that old tune go again? A favorite of dads and policy majors everywhere. Well, we're not here to discuss Gordon Lightfoot, although it is a quality segue into this topic. We're here to talk about the largest ship to ever sink on one of the Great Lakes. This monolithic masterwork full of ore was famous for playing music all the time, which would entertain those along the shores when it passed through. However, it did meet a grim fate, and the story is still quite well known today. During a pretty routine trip, a hefty storm brewed. The captain was aware of this and sent some messages relaying the issues, but never a distress signal. However, that might have been helpful, as during the voyage that ship sank and all 29 crew members perished. To this day, no bodies have been recovered. Nobody knows exactly what happened to the Edmund Fitzgerald. After years of examination and theorizing, many potential factors could have come into play. Some say that it may have been swamped, others claim it could have suffered structural failure or even been shoaled. Regardless of the actual problem, no reports from the ship itself materialized, so it's possible we'll never know.